Welcome back, Spiralers. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sam, and I'm here with my co-host,
Gina.
and we have one of the most highly anticipated guests of the entire year. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that the Secure Relationship is my most highly engaged account. Everyone I know gets shared posts from her. I read her posts daily. She has provided me such an incredible lens through which to understand myself, my personal relationships, and honestly, even the relationship I have to my business. And I want to let you guys know that I DM'd this woman multiple times this year, and unfortunately, she had them turned off. And it was not until a funny comment I left on a post was responded by her that we were able to connect and invite Julie today into the studio. So, without further ado, we have so much to get into. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, it's so great to be here. I had no idea my DMs were turned off, by the way. I did not know that. But I did personally see the comment and I did personally respond to that. So,
I was
yeah.
You can ask Gina. I was jumping for joy.
I was just going to say that I got a text immediately and she's like, guess who we're going to get on
Guess
the
who
podcast?
responded to my comment?
Oh my gosh, I love it. Yep.
Yeah, there's been so much information. I would say that your profile and account out of anyone, you give so much away for
Yeah.
free, which is incredible. And you have your podcast and now you have your book that's out,
hmm
which is incredible. But if anyone wanted to learn about their attachment style, your account has so much information. And we wanted this conversation to be an extension of that and an opportunity for us to go deeper.
Great.
And so I think to start us off, I'm really curious about how you got into this work. And then also for us to go down the path of explaining what we don't really know typically about each attachment style and the way that they are formed. So, yeah, I'm just so curious to know though, because given you are an expert, how'd you get into it?
Yeah. Well, I always had a part of me that really resonated with psychology from a very young age. I wanted to be a therapist, but then I got into undergrad and at the time it was kind of like, look, you can't go into psychology. Nobody goes into psychology. It's just, it wasn't a very, I don't want to say it wasn't respected, but it wasn't like something to make a sustainable income. Right. And so I kind of
Mhm.
got scared away by that and ended up taking a different route. But that part of me never died. I was, obsessed with self-help and from a very young age. And then I decided to have a family and stay home with my kids. And I just had such a drive to be the mom I wanted to be and could not do it. I did not have the skills.
Hmm.
I could not figure out a way to be, emotionally supportive and have boundaries, which I think is probably the biggest conundrum of parenting out there.
Mhm.
And I was just, really struggling. And I have 6 kids. So I had them all
Wow.
relatively close together. Yeah. And I was just having a really hard time. We planned on having 4 and then we had surprise twins and then a surprise 6th.
Wow.
Well, I mean, one of the twins was a surprise, I should say.
Yeah.
And so we went from 3 to 6 almost overnight. But so I was a few different things were happening. One, I was struggling with parenting in the way that I wanted to parent, and 2, just really not doing well at home with all those children and kind of out of my mind. So I decided to go, you know, to the shock and horror of every person in my life. I decided to go back to grad school when my youngest was 1 and just get help. And, I just had this drive to do it. I was reading all of these self-help books. Nothing was really getting me anywhere. And I thought, I just need to go figure this stuff out for myself. And so I went
Mhm.
back to grad school, immediately found attachment theory, which was not being taught at the time. I had to kind of just do the grad school stuff over here on my own and then just dove into attachment theory, learning that. That's really what I was doing, is learning my own stuff. And anyway, so graduated and I had to start getting my hours to get my license. And I adamantly did not want to work with couples. I mean, did not, had zero interest. I was in California at the time, and in California, everybody, like probably 75 to 90% of the therapists have what's called an LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapy. It's a very common master's level license there. And so that's what I kind of had to get. It was either that or social work at the time. And so I really resented that. I did not want to be a licensed marriage and family therapist. I wanted to work with individuals, and that was it. I didn't want to work with children. I just wanted to work with individuals. And so I started doing that, and I was really enjoying it. But then I had to see couples to get my hours. You have to see some couples, to get your full licensure. And so I saw the first couple, and I was like, this actually could be interesting. It's very difficult. It wasn't, one person, you're just like, it's, you can just kind of roll. With a couple, I mean, you're dealing with two different people, you're dealing with the relationship. It's just so much going on. And I liked it. And so I immediately just thought, well, I've got to get some training in this. And I love attachment theory, and I remember EFT from grad school. And so I just flew out to Montana to the first EFT training that was in the United States from that day. Could have done it with Sue Johnson in LA like a month later, but I did not want, I don't wait when I want something, which is a kind of a flaw. But so I just flew out to Montana. Anyway, now I live in Montana. 4 months later, we moved to Montana because I fell in love with Montana at the same time. And yeah, so I have not taken an individual as a client since that day. That was, I think, 12 years ago. And just absolutely fell in love with couples work. It was just, it's such a passion. And, I think what it is that instead of, I think there's so much to be said for individual therapy, nothing against individual therapy, but it was really hard for me to have these bonds with my clients and then send them home without that in their life. And so for me, it feels really good to create that bond with my clients that then I transfer to between them. And it just feels like more complete work to me. And it's also very challenging. It's, I don't know, I kind of think of it like there's this very emotional aspect to it that's very fulfilling and healing. And then there's this like chess part of it where there's a lot of strategy involved. And I really enjoy all of that happening at once.
That makes so much sense. I mean, I would imagine that when you are working with a couple, it's almost like, I see it as like tennis partners. And it'd be really weird to only coach one of them and not the other. And I feel like when it comes to relationships, especially, it really is so helpful to have both people using the same language. Or understanding kind of the same rules of play, I guess you can say. So I can see.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah, I can totally see why that would be so fulfilling in that way. And I mean, thank God for people like you.
Thank God.
Thank God.
I call us the adrenaline junkies of the therapy world, the couples therapist.
Yeah, because it's a roller coaster ride for sure. I mean, I don't even have to imagine, I know. But I'm curious to know then, to get into the attachment styles, when you've seen all of these couples come into your office, I mean, you've probably seen who knows how many at this point.
Yeah.
What do most of them come in and say they want, or what is the problem?
Well, usually the problem is, it's going to be one of two things or both, which is going to be they want just disconnection, just not feeling emotionally connected to each other. And then there's just fighting. And I would say probably more people come fighting, which they're wanting connection too, but more people are coming because they want me to help put the fire out. With the fighting, they know they want more connection, but that's not their first objective. But then there are some people that they come and they recognize, we want to stop fighting and we want to feel close. Or there are people who come and say, hey, we don't fight, but we don't also feel close. So, the fighting is over I'll give you the most common things that couples are struggling with on the surface is parenting, money, sex, sometimes politics lately has become a bigger one, in-law stuff.
But ultimately, the couples are not connecting, whether they're kind of shut down or whether they're having a more sort of reactive relationship to themselves or each other. They're not connecting. And so what do you see? I mean, you diagnose these issues all the time when people come in.
It's not just they're not connecting, it's they're actively disconnecting.
Yeah.
That's probably a bigger piece than not connecting, because a lot of people actually are connecting. I know I might be, contradicting myself, but forgive me. But most people that I see, the average couples, not all of them, do have moments where they're connecting. They have good times.
Right.
They go on dates. They have good times with their families. But what happens is they get in these negative cycles and they're actively disconnecting. And the disconnection is happening often enough that their relationship is in distress.
And I think that's an interesting way of describing it, the active disconnection, because I think most partners don't want to see themselves as actively disconnecting. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm trying to connect. I'm trying to make things work. And
Mm-hmm.
even the fighting feels like I'm trying to make things work and I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to be heard.
They
And
are, yeah.
so, right, a fight is I'm trying to be heard and so are you at the same time.
Right. And they're
But for
not consciously disconnecting. It's all happening
yes.
unconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to kind of touch on, that I think a lot of times in relationships, there are so many ruptures that happen and these
Mm-hmm.
walls that get put up, but they're almost invisible walls until you become really aware. But I think so many relationships go on for so long where there's all these walls up and there just hasn't been enough of that active connection, I guess, to repair that until it gets
Yes.
to the point where it's so broken, you can't not see it. And then, yeah, sometimes it can feel really impossible to repair the historical path of how many disconnections there have been. Um,
Very true.
yeah. So, I mean, I want to just like jump into this.
Mm.
I'm so curious to know. I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with attachment theory, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what each style is. So
Mm-hmm.
we would love to kind of hear, I guess, your explanation of each one and maybe even what people are surprised to know about it or what maybe some misconceptions are about each one. But we just kind of want to let you run off and say whatever you want to say about
Yeah.
them
Oh my
because
gosh.
we'll eat it
This
up.
is at some point I'm going to have to write down just a scripted answer for this. There's so
Yeah.
many things to say. I'm going to try to give it to you. And every time I'm asked this, my brain goes to a different part, whatever I happen to be working on project wise or what's coming
Yeah.
up for my couples. So I always have kind of different answers. But
Mm-hmm.
right now my answer is that, the core of anxious attachment is self-abandonment. When there's self-abandonment, what happens is the anxious attached partner is relying too heavily on what's outside of them to regulate what's inside of them because they don't know how to show up for themselves. And so what
Mm-hmm.
happens is they're, they have this external locus of control. And so all of this energy is going on to what is my partner doing or saying to help me out here to feel okay. And, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times their partner is, definitely doing and saying things that are triggering them.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of this is self-work that they're not able to do themselves. And so then they get more triggered than what is a lot of times appropriate to the situation. And then they react and then they get into these cycles with their partner. And then ultimately at the end of the day, it's almost like I can't feel okay unless my partner is XYZ, thinking
Mm-hmm.
something, telling me something, staying home with me instead of going out, saying things in the right way. And it goes beyond healthy because we do need partners showing up for each other, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But for
Mm-hmm.
for anxious attachment, there's just like an over reliance on co-regulation, which isn't
Mm-hmm.
actually co-regulation when there's an over reliance on it, but that's a whole other thing. And
Yeah.
then avoidant attachment is the core of, is self-denial, meaning I don't even want to have contact with my needs or feelings. I don't even want to go there. What's the point? You know, so because of that, they aren't able to help themselves emotionally. They are helping themselves emotionally. They just don't know it. The way that they try to help themselves emotionally, the way that they attempt self-regulation is just stuff it all away, ignore the problems, don't go there. Just, there's this one line that I like to say, we just need to be nicer to each other. It's like,
My God.
yeah, right.
I've
That's
heard
it.
that one before.
It's so easy. We just be nicer to each other. I just got to do better. I don't want to understand why I'm needing to behave in this way. Like I have no interest in examining all of that and kind of trying to understand what needs am I trying to get met here. And so what happens is then the way that they attempt to help their own emotions, which is not helping their own emotions, but the way they're attempting to, then that's how they try to help their partner with their partner's emotions. You just need to let it go. You need to be more positive. You're being irrational, or why are you always mad? Push it away, push it away. And so a lot of times, most of the couples I treat are in this relationship where one is anxious, one's avoidant. And I can bore you all day with why that happens. But then we have this disorganized attachment. The way I describe it is you take a blender, you pour in some anxious, you pour in some avoidant, sprinkle on some trauma, blend it all up. And then you might pour it in a glass, or you might pour it all over the counter, who knows? So it's a mixed bag, but usually there's a trauma component. Exactly. An attachment smoothie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard being disorganized because, anxious and avoidant are hard enough, but they're actually considered organized because there's a lot of predictability there. You kind of know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Disorganized doesn't have that level of predictability. It's just much more chaotic. And I don't mean just what you see on the outside. I mean what's going on inside of the person also.
And I think what must be so confusing for a lot of people too, though, is, can you be in a little bit more anxious, maybe with a certain type of relationship, and then with another one more avoidant? And then would that person be then categorized as disorganized, or can you just be clearly in one or the other?
I think this is kind of my take on this. And I think people have different experiences, but I think most people are probably going to grow up with a certain attachment style. And then that attachment styles tend to follow the path of least resistance. So you're just going to sort of keep recreating the same dynamics that and you're probably going to end up in romantic relationships where you kind of play the same role that you did in childhood. Now, does everybody do that? Not real. No. Some people are going to have different kinds of deviations. Some people will end up, let's say having somewhat of an anxious attachment, and then they get into a relationship with someone who has a stronger anxious attachment, and that stronger anxious attachment knocks them into more of an avoidant way of being. But at the end of the day, it's hard if someone, generally their pattern in life has been to disconnect from their emotional experience. It's hard to just magically shift that by putting them into a relationship with someone else. Or if someone's just kind of, grows up being overwhelmed with their emotional experiences, it's hard, it's hard. So you'll see different flavors, and anything is possible when it comes to attachment, especially healing. But I think that most people kind of tend to stay pretty consistent. And I don't think it means you're disorganized. I think probably a lot of people that might see themselves flexing a bit, are probably more on the secure end than they are on the disorganized end. Disorganized is a lack of flexibility, but a lot of unpredictability, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Because I'll just be honest, me and Gina, sometimes we read the books and we're like, are we disorganized?
Yeah, because I think for me, I would assume I'm more anxious, but I think that I am disorganized because both of my parents were both very different in the way that they kind of connected to me. And it also really changed a lot from when I was really young. I would say by the time I turned maybe 7, it really changed where my dad basically completely disconnected and was not really present in our family from the age of 10 onwards for sure. And there's something about that age. My daughter is turning 10.
Okay.
And I can see that, in this age, 7, 8, 9, 10, when they become so much more independent, they're not like this little kid anymore. And I can see that for my dad. I think once I left that childlike state, things changed for him, and he didn't know how to interact with me anymore. And I actually see that with our kids, my brother's kids and my kids, and he's very playful with them. And I'm really curious to see, once they are reaching this age where they're not like this little kid anymore, how that interaction will change for him too. So yeah. And then my mom and I mean, very complicated, but I do think that I'm probably more disorganized than one specific one. But Maybe we'll find out.
Yeah, but I think what's really interesting about what Julie's saying is that actually if you're experiencing a little bit of this flexibility,
Right.
that actually it might be that you have a lot of security. And I
Yeah,
could actually
it's
see
just
that
be
in
you
you.
could bounce back and forth. Right. It's not
Mm-hmm.
people with a disorganized attachment tend to be kind of lower functioning in life and relation. Not always, but they tend to get more de-escalated, bigger reactions, more unpredictability. And maybe that is you, but
Mm-hmm.
it could be that you just have it could be that you're just kind of closer to that secure spectrum, but you can kind of weave back and forth. But let me just say this too.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the perspective of a couples therapist, right? I
Yes.
don't work with individuals. I don't work with people from one relationship to another. So my perspective is very limited in that sense. I work with
Mm-hmm.
what's in front of me, and what is almost always in front of me is a very clear anxious attacher and a very clear
Right.
avoidant attacher. And so
Yeah.
what goes on outside of those contexts, I probably should be very careful about how much I speak to that.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a great clarification. And something that I really wanted to discuss, which I think you talk about a lot in your content, is that there are two different ways of attaching, and there's the attachment and relationship you have to
Mhm.
yourself, and then the attachment and relationship you have to your partner. And so I think it's safe for us to all say we probably learn our attachment style in the relationship. I think it might be harder for us to find out what our attachment style
Mhm.
is if you're just single or solo all the time. You may not be in situations that are vulnerable or triggering as often. It's
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
possible. But I think the romantic relationship naturally brings up more of those insecurities. You might end up going to read a book, you might get a therapist, and then you're like, oh, I have anxious attachment. But then what I find, Julie, is that the person who recognizes this, whether it's one or both partners in the relationship, is they start to look at that and realize, oh my God, these are all the things that are messed up about me. Here's everything that I need to heal. And I love that attempt, but they're often doing that in an attempt to heal what's going on in the relationship. And
Yes.
so I would love for you to speak to how incomplete that could potentially be, what issues could come up, and what is possible for
Mhm.
each person to heal within themselves and in the relationship. Like what responsibility or percentage do we take up in the relationship?
Mhm.
Because I usually find it is one person who's trying to learn and
Kind of
realize
leading
all
the
this.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other person either comes along or doesn't. But what might be some pitfalls or advantages to learning about this work on your own in the context of a relationship?
Well, first of all, I think that when you see a relationship where it appears on the surface that one person's doing all the work, a lot of times they're both doing equal work. You just can't see it. That the
Mm-hmm.
person that looks like they're doing all the work, some of that is driven by their own anxiety. And the
Mm-hmm.
other person is actually offsetting that anxiety by looking as if they're avoiding the work, but what they're really doing on a very subconscious level is balancing out the anxiety of the system. They're
Hmm.
protecting the relationship in a different way. Because if you take an anxious partner, and nobody's better or worse than the other, but if you take an anxious partner and you give them a relationship book, that relationship book is going to get wrapped up with their anxious attachment. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily going to be a good thing for the relationship. So something has got to balance that out. And a lot of times that's the avoidant partner balancing it out, going, okay, this is too much energy. But then they take it too far to the other extreme. And they're like, I don't want to talk about any of that. All that's
Yeah.
doing is making things worse. So it's tricky. It's very hard sometimes to get people to see it that way, that like, look, you're both really actually trying to protect the relationship in different ways.
Mm,
Sometimes I, I, sometimes I say like the anxious partner's like watering the plant with gasoline, and the avoidant partner's not watering the plant at all, but
Mm-hmm.
they're both trying to help the plant in their own ways. The
mhm.
avoidant partner's over there going, it doesn't need water. It's got sun and soil. It's fine. So anyway, I don't know if I can do justice to that argument in this short amount of time. But you asked another question.
But that was super helpful even for you to share because I think that it's very hallmark of anxious attachers to be like, you're not doing anything.
That's
Like,
what, yes,
look at
it's,
me. I'm doing all
yeah.
this work and you're not doing anything. And so how do two people who think they're both doing something get to a place where they're doing the things that are actually going to work.
Well, the key is in vulnerability. That's it. I mean, it's like both have to be able to do vulnerability, and they have to know what that even means. A lot of times, avoidant partners clearly aren't doing a vulnerability because they're avoidant. They don't want to go anywhere near those feelings. But then a lot of times anxious partners really aren't doing vulnerability either. They're doing emotional reactivity, but they're not doing actual vulnerability. And so, it's interesting because I think that the self-work component is every bit as important as the relationship. I don't think you could ever separate out self-work from relationship work. But then the other piece to that is relationship work fosters and supports self-work, right? So the more safe someone feels in their relationship and connected and close, that's going to resource them to do more self-work. But we cannot skip the self-work part. I mean, it just can't.
Yeah.
I think it really, if you listen to my podcast or, any work I do with couples, I mean, I'm doing as much self-work with each of those partners as I am relationship work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's huge. And we definitely both know within our own lives, but just even the people around us, our clients, that's absolutely true, because how could you show up in a relationship if you're not also working?
You can't. Yeah.
You like literally cannot. But then that also brings
yeah.
up, I think, kind of going off of even what Sam was saying earlier, I think that's what makes it so hard, because again, when one person is maybe perceived to be doing more quote unquote work, or maybe leading the kind of ship and reaching out to learn about these resources, but the other one maybe doesn't think there's an issue or doesn't want to, like, how do those people eventually get onto the same page?
Yeah.
Because I think that just further kind of reinforces those cycles of anxious
It does.
versus avoidant.
Yeah.
But yeah, how could you then approach your partner to say, hey, here's what I think could be supportive for us? Like, how could you get someone kind of on board with you?
Okay. So I do talk about this a lot in my book because that is a reality. I mean, at the end of the day,
Yes.
it is very true that the anxious partner, even if their delivery and their implementation strategies aren't so healthy, it is very true that they're the ones that are usually seeking out the help, right? Now, I'll add to that when I work, by the time the couples get to me, when they're actually in the session, the avoidant partner is a lot easier to work with, in my opinion. So it's almost like the anxious partner their anxious attachment is temporarily at a disadvantage when they get to therapy, but the avoidant attachment is at a disadvantage to get them to therapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's kind of equal disadvantage there. But so what I say is this, I say, look, you got to figure out how to work on yourself. If you're the anxious partner, unfortunately, if you're the one in the relationship that is kind of taking the lead on this, and that doesn't mean all are, right? But if you are that person, you're going to have to kind of make a commitment to, you know what, my partner isn't able to be with me right now. And their unwillingness to be with me right now is likely rooted in stuff that they brought to the relationship, but it might also very well be rooted in stuff that we've created together, cycles that we've created together. So I'm going to have to do my part to learn healthier communication skills, to self-work, right? To show up in healthier ways, to create what I call in the book an attachment-friendly environment, which is non-shaming, which is validating, which is, all these things that create safer relationships. And one person really truly can make great headway in creating a safer environment. People thrive in a safer environment. People self-reflect in a safer environment. When people are in these chronic negative cycles and there's bad energy in the air, right? And you're kind of constantly having to be defensive or reactive because you're getting triggered left and right.
Yeah.
Your energy is going into maintaining self-protection, right?
Yeah.
Being heard, getting your emotional needs met, feeling understood. And when one partner can do their part to minimize that negative energy and increase the positive energy, it takes the pressure off the other partner. So their energy is sort of freed up and they're more likely to use that energy on self-reflection. It's just how emotional systems work. And so is there a guarantee that, if you do this, that your partner is going to start self-reflecting and no, there's no guarantee. All you can do is increase the odds. But I have seen it work, for many, many people time and time again. And, what I always say is like, look, if you really do put your work in and you really do work on yourself and try to be your best self, even when your partner isn't able to meet you in that initially, and, you months, weeks have gone by or whatever, and you're still really not fulfilled and you don't have a ton of hope that your partner is going to join you and try to work on themselves, that's when you might want to step back and look for a different option, whatever that looks like for you. But there is a lot of value in doing your part when your partner isn't able to initially meet you there.
I mean, absolutely. And I wonder if you have any sort of like hallmark traits or characteristics for people to be able to help them discern when it is really the relationship they can't heal versus when it's themselves that needs healing. Because, right, both need to happen for the relationship to feel harmonious, because that's going to have two harmonious people who are feeling good and at their best selves. But what if one or both people, I guess it would be fine if it was both people, but let's just say one, because people who are listening to this podcast are probably not getting their partners to listen to it. But let's say one person is realizing, okay, I'm doing the self-work. I'm the one who has the coach. I'm the one who has a therapist. I'm listening to this. I'm learning the self-regulation tools. I'm becoming more securely attached within my own body. Yet this relationship doesn't feel right. And I think a lot of times, especially women, can feel like, but maybe it's because I haven't done enough work yet.
Yeah.
What do you start to notice characteristically about this type of situation? And how can we help people discern whether it's actually there might be a little bit more self-work to do here, or it could actually be that you can't heal that relationship? And I think it's hard for people to know, when is it us and when is it me?
Yeah.
Even when you want the relationship to continue working, like you're committed to that, like when is it like, okay, that was me, and when is it this is the
Healthy
cycle?
person will start to naturally detach from something that is not good for them.
That makes a lot of
It
sense.
will happen on its own. A non-healthy person will continue clinging to expectations from someone that can't show up for them. When you start feeling more comfortable in your own skin, when you start being able to separate what your partner is doing and saying from your whole sense of well-being, right? I mean, yes, we are all impacted by our partner. We have to be. That's what connection is all about. But if you're really unable to feel okay in the world in your own skin, unless your partner is in the exact place you need them to be, that's a problem. And when you start getting healthier, you start being able to separate it out, being like, okay, they're in a bad spot, but like I'm okay. I'm all right. It hurts. I'm disappointed, but like I've got all these other things that I can kind of rely on with myself and do. And if that is happening so consistently that you're having to kind of, you just lose, you can't ever get the connection from them. It's just not happening, or it's not happening reliably. Your body will on its own start to stop expecting. And when you stop expecting, the attachment will start to fizzle. And it's called a burnout. I mean, your body will speak to you and say, you don't expect it anymore. It's like, it's kind of dies. And to be honest with you, it's very difficult to save a relationship when one person has experienced a burnout to that degree. But when that person has experienced this burnout, they're actually a happier person, other than the loss of the relationship. I mean, that's sad. Sometimes there's family, it can be very, very hard to be in a position where you feel that detached and you can't get yourself to go back in, but you're still a happier person, just, outside of the relationship.
Because you have that secure attachment to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, this is really going to be helpful, I think, for so many people, because even hearing that detachment is a thing a healthy person would do from an unhealthy situation, I think is going to be illuminating, because I think what happens to a lot of women is they feel guilt. Especially because a lot of times that healthy detachment starts to trigger the other person into wanting to do more work.
It does.
They're like, shit, like, do you want me to go to therapy? Do you want me to read a book? Like, absolutely. Like, let me validate you. And then you're like, Yeah, and so I'm sure you've seen a lot of couples go through that, but I think it's interesting for people to hear like, oh, once that burnout's happened, you are feeling happier
Mm-hmm.
in general, but just with respect to the relationship, there's obviously a loss. But that overall, this is a healthy behavior to stop expecting to, yeah, just begin to
Mm-hmm.
phase
It's almost like
out.
you hear about people growing apart, you know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's another way to say it, is growing apart.
Mm-hmm. Or like
Yeah.
outgrowing the
It's just someone
relationship.
with an anxious attachment, at first, they're going to fight that growing apart tooth and nail. You know,
Yeah.
they're just going to,
Yeah.
and yeah. And
Mhm.
some people never stop the fight. They always stay
Right.
anxious.
Yeah.
And that's a
That's like my
real
parents.
unhealthy place to stay. Yeah, it's like God, you have to kind of live with this chronic nervous system escalation. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's this other middle ground where some people stop being anxious and they start accepting their partner for who they are, limitations and all. And they
Mm.
actually learn to be okay with that. They actually, it's not bad enough to leave, and they just kind of, there's many couples out there that do okay without the ideal, most perfect, most connected relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's good to hear that because I think that the discovery of attachment theory, I mean, all these different theories that are ultimately here to help us become better people, better partners, I think they all pretty much create the idealization of a
Mm-hmm.
perfect relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it would be good to hear too. What do you see in secure relationships? Because I think we have a hugely idealized version of what a secure relationship looks like. Like,
So true.
I always validate, I always feel emotionally supported. Like, but what does reality of a secure relationship look like so that people can know what to strive for and not to maybe compare themselves to something that's totally fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we've got secure, which is, like the ideal level of connection. And, couples, truly do, I would say, 75 to 90% of the time, there's just a felt sense of ease, right? They just
Mm.
Mhm.
have this felt sense, if they think about each other, that I know my partner is going to really show up for me when I really need them, right? That
Mm.
they're going to be there. I can go to them for help with problems. I can reach them with concerns about the relationship. And most of the time I'm going to get a response. They're going to hear me out. They might not tell me exactly what I want to hear, but they'll they're willing to hear me and validate me and have an open dialogue with me about whatever I bring to them.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this issue of timing. A lot of people think, well, it's secure only if go to my partner and right then and there they drop everything and they're just like
Right.
right there present for me. That's not realistic. Sometimes there's timing issues. Sometimes a partner isn't in a place where they can show up emotionally. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they need to say, hey, I'm tired right now, let's talk about this later. Sometimes it might not be appropriate to just drop everything and do emotions. Sometimes we might be in a tough situation where you need to say, hey, look, I know you've got your stuff, we're going to talk about that later. Right now, my head is kind of in getting through this situation. I know that sounds like, we're kind of like the person with the anxious attachment can be at the other, the wrong end of that stick. But I think too that a lot of this work is seen through the lens of anxious attachment, which
Mm.
is the interpretation of emotional availability is emotional availability anytime I need it right then and there without fail. There's kind of a need to sort of like wait sometimes. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what you're also saying is that if you are securely attached, you have the hope and expectation that emotional availability will become accessible, but not
Yes.
necessarily now.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
okay, like you're on a phone call right now, but you'll call me back, sort of
Right.
thing. And you're not losing it in between the time
Right.
between you reaching for that and actually receiving that.
Right. Or even your partner is just, doesn't have the resources,
Mm-hmm.
to respond to you right then and there. They're tired. I mean, it's kind of like we need to do vulnerability to have safe, close relationships. Securely attached partners can do vulnerability, but we also need to understand there's times to do vulnerability and there's also times to not do vulnerability.
Mm.
And partners have to work together. It's kind of like, yeah, we need to keep a clean house, but that doesn't mean that we're cleaning every second of the day. And that doesn't mean one partner can, just be like, hey, we're going to clean right now, right here and now. We got to start cleaning the house. But yet we both need to
Right.
work together to keep the house clean. So it's kind of an effort, we're managing each other. We're kind of like checking in with each other, figuring out where we are. But it's also kind of an effortless thing once you get it going. It's like once people feel secure that
Yeah.
they're going to get vulnerable connection at some point, we're going to get there enough of the time. There's also a reasonable expectation that it's not like once a week you're going to talk to me about your feelings. It can't be like that either. But they, once you're secure in the fact that you're going to have it when you need it, then you stop crying for it all the time. It's like your body trusts you'll get it. You paradoxically kind of stop needing it as much, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, because you're not in a deficit anymore.
Exactly.
Right? Like
Exactly.
you are not in debt of that connection or that safety. And because I could see that to an anxious person, if their partner isn't available in that moment, it can feel like such a huge rejection, which then further puts that anxious attachment person deeper into their attachment style. And then that would trigger for the avoidant person wanting to like distance
Right.
themselves from that. But yeah,
And
I
if
would
the
imagine
avoidant
that
person is never showing up enough to begin with, then of course that anxious person is going to have a hard time when they reach and don't get it.
Yeah. And I think anxious people in general, when they find this work, are pretty aware and ready to heal their anxiety. They're like, lost it enough times.
Yeah.
I want to change, especially the ones who are like anger forward. That was me. It becomes so obvious that you have work to do. And I remember thinking like, oh, like this is like definitely me. Like I'm like getting so upset. But I think that the avoidant person has so much difficulty realizing they have work to do because they're like, I don't freak out.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I'm fine with everything. I think we just need to be nicer to each other.
Yes.
And so they also create a supportive illusion for themselves that keeps them from the work that they need to do. And so how do you begin to acquaint avoidance with their inner work? Because the hardest part about doing inner work is perceiving that you need to do it.
Yeah.
So what are you offering for avoidant partners to get them like in the arena?
Well, you got to get them feeling success with vulnerability for one. You got to get buy-in. You have to get them to see there's value in this, right? And you got to get them, first of all, it's easy to say we don't have a problem, right? But then if you can really kind of talk about like more of these specific examples of negative cycles, right? Like it's easy to say broadly, oh, we're actually fine. But when you get into the specifics of a negative cycle, it's much easier to say, look, there is an actual downside here, right? We didn't get the conversation about money resolved. And we did end up feeling unheard and invalidated and yucky with each other. Regardless of how well we're doing in this like, kind of meta context, like this is a real problem, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice? Here's a line I like to say, like, wouldn't it be nice if we just forget about labeling ourselves, but say, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could maybe not go into those fights over money and instead kind of have these harmonious conversations and actually kind of find some resolution here? That is hard to argue with, right? It's easy if you're talking vaguely,
Right, it is, but I feel like avoidance would be like, yeah, it would be nice. So you should just stop freaking out. So I think like, you know what would be really good? I love your post about the negative cycle because I like seeing kind of where it ends up, where you're like, and then the anxious person never gets what they need and then this starts all over again. But could you kind of detail that negative cycle for us so we can kind of see where it is that we could interrupt that?
Yeah, sure. So, okay. So usually, you know, in the stereotypical way of a negative cycle playing out, an anxious partner is going to bring up some sort of concern because their role in the relationship is close the distance, right? Whereas the avoidant
Yes.
partner's role in the relationship subconsciously is keep things from getting worse. They're both trying to protect in their own way. So the anxious partner brings up the topic, but they bring it up hot. And they bring it up hot for a reason. One reason is that's kind of what they brought to the relationship to begin with a lot of the times is heat. And they bring it up hot because they have experienced in the relationship not being responded to. And
Yeah.
so now the avoidant partner, they feel attacked, they feel caught off guard, they feel overwhelmed, and understandably, because this person is coming at them in an attacking way. Again, all function of an overall bigger picture of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they respond by just defending themselves, like you're
Yeah.
seeing it all wrong, or they get really rational, anything to sort of like bury the concern. And then when they go into
Mm-hmm.
their place of burying the concern, now the anxious partner feels invalidated for what they brought up and unresponded to. They get even more escalated, they get bigger. Now the avoidant partner is like, might go into just tell them what they want to hear. Okay, fine, we'll just, you know, whatever, do it your way, however you want to do it, whatever. Well, the anxious
Yeah.
partner doesn't really
Conceding.
buy that. Yeah, they
Right.
understand you're just trying to make me happy, and then that ties into their, you know, self-beliefs of, look, here I am again being confirmed I'm too much. Now I'm just the
Right.
scary monster that they're just trying to like calm down. And then the anxious partner gets more escalated. Why do I don't want you to not leave. I want you to want to not leave. That's a big,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a big
classic.
one. Yeah. And then the avoidant partner finally gets to the point where like none of my strategies are working here. I can't make this stop. And then so they just kind of shut down. And then the anxious partner tries to keep them re-engaged for a while, but that doesn't work. And then they both kind of go off in their places of tension. And so where's the point at which you can shift this? Well, I mean, both have an opportunity. The anxious partner has an opportunity to come in a different way. You know, a helpful way might be, listen, I understand that you wouldn't want to talk about this problem because we have not had a lot of success with this topic in the past. You know, it has taken us down a road into those negative cycles. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that you might not want to talk about this, but at the same time, if we don't talk about it, then I'm just going to, you know, feel really alone with it. And that's not really going to get us anywhere anyway. So could we try this in a way that maybe we could, know, try to reach each other and have a conversation without going into that place? Let's see what happens. That's one change point, right? Now, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we do need for the avoidant partner to know how to respond to that
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's positive and like meet that person. That person was just vulnerable. They, you know, express their needs with healthy assertion. And then, you know, let's say the anxious partner does come in hot and not their best self. And so what can the avoidant partner do? Well, the avoidant partner might need to say, look, I get you're coming to me with some heat here. And it makes sense to me because we have had historically this difficult time and, you know, you felt not responded to, but let's just kind of try this again. Can we try this in a new way? You know, I'm here to hear you. You don't have to get
Mm-hmm.
reactive. You know, let's kind of try to talk about this in a new way. I mean, it's hard for me to answer that kind of a question because there are so many different techniques you can use. And that's why I wrote the
Yeah.
book, is to kind of present all of that in one place. And I talk about, hey, here's what happens if the reach fails, and here's, you know,
Mm-hmm.
here's how to respond to that. I have a whole chapter on, you know, ways to bring up just all sorts of different topics with different options. So it is hard, but
Mm-hmm.
everybody, you know, everybody has an opportunity at any given point in these interactions to shift. And you can
Mm-hmm.
shift it, you know, 10 levels down the road, but as a, you know, 10 iterations down the road, or you can shift it at the beginning. Everybody has room to shift at some point. And couples have got to kind of get out of this idea that, you know, it's a race to the bottom, or I'm only going to be my best self if you're your best self, and really get on board to, hey, we really got to help each other here.
Right. And focus on the common goal at the
Exactly.
end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And view those negative cycles as the enemy, not each other. That's a big piece of this.
That's huge.
That is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually just like feeling like sad inside when you were talking about like when the reach fails, because I think
Yeah.
that's one of the most devastating things that happens.
Yes.
How do you support people through failed reaches?
Okay, so a failed reach, I mean, if your partner really isn't able to show up for you right then and there, right? The healthy thing to do, I'll just go ahead and put it out there. The gold standard is to check in with yourself and say, you know what? This didn't work. I feel crushed. That was vulnerable for me. I'm used to going in hot. And usually people go in hot because on some level it works, right?
True.
Okay. And so I tried something new. I tried to go vulnerable. It didn't work. Not only did I just get reinforced that the heat is the only way to get through, which sucks, right? But now I feel dropped, right?
Yeah.
And you know what, though? My feelings make sense right now. The anger makes sense because that's my body's way of saying, this isn't what I want this to be like. This feels terrible, right? Anybody's going to be mad when they go in and try to be their best self and they get dropped. And then underneath that anger is, fear and grief and the ability to kind of sit with that and love yourself through it. It's like they can't be there for me right now. Whatever the reason, they're going through their own stuff. They're not willing, whatever it is, they can't be there for me right now. How can I be here for me?
Yeah.
How can I show up for me while they can't? And that's usually going to get you to a little more regulated place, right? It is so hard. It is so, so hard, especially for anxious attachment, because those with anxious attachment, just historically in their whole life, they've been trying to get help with their emotions. Nobody ever helped them with their emotions, and nobody ever taught them how to help themselves with their emotions. If someone would have helped them while they were growing up, they would have naturally learned to help themselves. They would have had, like you said earlier, your own mom. You would have integrated your own caretaker, and these situations wouldn't feel so life-threatening and devastating. And it just gives you a little bit more regulation. And then when the dust settles, that's when it's time to go back in and be like, hey, listen, we got to talk here because I really love us. I love this relationship. And I really don't like these cycles we get stuck in. And I'm really doing some work over here to try to bring things to you in a kinder, softer way. But I need some help. I need when that happens, I need to have that be, I need help with that. Otherwise, I'm just going to fall, my nervous system, I'm just going to fall right back into the heat. Not that you necessarily want to do that, but the odds are, it's just that needs to words to it, which is, because there's truth to that. If you're over there being your best self and someone's not responding positively to that, what's that telling them? Well, fall back into the protective move. That's what I have to do with couples. Still, you're responsible for not doing that. I always have to balance out when I say that, but still, I mean, we're just working with odds here, right? And then, there is a good chance if that process when as I described, there really is a good chance that your partner is going to be open to that. They're going to really probably be able to step back and go, it is true that they tried. Will that create some softening in the relationship and make things show up gradually in a new way? Very well could be. Here's what to not do. To get all triggered and get reactive and just go right back into the system with, look, see, even when I try to do it right, then you might get a good response from them. But what's the downside? The downside is you've just reinforced that negative cycle that really long-term doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one of the hardest things about learning attachment styles and how to heal from them is really discerning between codependence and co-regulation. And what is a healthy expectation to have from your partner to help you and what is more your responsibility to take care of on your own. And then sometimes you might be left feeling like, but I want their support with this, but they're not available. And maybe that, sometimes it's like, is this something that I continuously need to just be doing on my own and repairing on my own? Or is this a fair expectation to have my partner to help me with this? So could you maybe explain a little bit between the difference between the two?
Yeah. So for a relationship to thrive and be healthy, there needs to be co-regulation, period. Plenty of it, right? We have to have it. Partners have to be able to help each other with their feelings. That's love. That's connection. There
Yeah.
are
Oh,
people
yeah.
out there who might be able to be in relationships where there is no emotional intimacy, and that's, for them to do. But for most people, they want love. We want connection. That's what we pair up for, is for love and connection.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
requires co-regulation, helping with emotions. I'm here for you. Let's talk. I'll support you. Let's hug. Let's cuddle, sex, whatever it is. But when that person is not available, you have to be able to help yourself. And that's if you're codependent, you're just going to always rely on that person for help, for emotional help. It's just like you can't, it's unrealistic that anybody can show up for you every second of the day, always when you need them. There are some things that are yours to work on. You really do, it's a matter of over reliance on a co-regulation. It's kind of like co-regulation is you help me feel better in the world. Codependency is you make me feel better in the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation I think that people will have. I'm curious to know about co-regulation then. So let's just say there are two people in the relationship. There's the anxious, there's the avoidant. Is there an element of when you're co-regulating, let's just say if you and I are in a relationship,
Yeah.
and if you are bringing something to me that's very anxiety kind of ridden, is there a part of me that I almost have to turn off in order to be there for her? Because I would assume that in this dynamic, could this person be triggered by what the anxious person's bringing to them, and now they have their own emotionality to kind of be with while also trying to help soothe the other person? What do you have to say to that kind
I
of
think it's
dynamic?
not turning off. I think it's honoring both at the same time.
Okay, yeah.
You might have to do it consciously at first, but then it sort of becomes a part of you, where it's kind of like, look, I need to keep one foot in me, right? In my
Yeah.
grounded experience. And I also want to put one foot in them and kind of try to understand where they are and show up for them, validate them, be there for them, comfort them, but not in a way that I can entirely lose myself and get so scared of, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Okay, like if I'm at dinner with my husband and he's telling me about some conflict with a coworker, right? Okay, so if I just turn myself off, I'm not really engaged in what he's saying. I'm just kind of like, yeah, huh, blah, blah, If I go overboard into anxiety, I start getting scared of how this is going to affect me. I start going, wait a minute, everything's not good at work. What does that mean? What's going to happen? Are you not on solid
Right.
footing with your coworkers? Or if you're starting to have bad interactions at work, are you going to now come home all stressed out? It's like you can go into 1,000 different scary places with just a story like that. So a secure response, a co-regulating response is like you feel some of their pain, right? You feel this is tough for them, but it's not going into this like you're taking it all on. You're feeling it as big as they are. You're getting all
Yeah.
scared about what's happening. And so you're able to kind of ground yourself and just kind of step into their world and be like, yeah, that's really hard. You find experiences in yourself of like, I've had hard times at work before, or I've had a situation like this with a friend before, and I can feel some of that with you, but I'm not being consumed by it. That's one example of co-regulation.
Yeah. I think you just don't get activated as you're
No,
co-regulating with
you get
someone.
engaged, emotional engagement
Engaged, yes.
without emotional overwhelm, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I
You're
actually just thought of an
engaged but not
example.
triggered. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I mean by
Yes.
activated, not
Yeah.
triggered. Because like just my friend yesterday was,
Yes.
talking about her loved one who's sick, and I do remember feeling like, wow, this is like heavy, but like I'm not feeling triggered by the situation. Maybe if I was like her family member, I might, but yeah, I think that helps because
Yeah.
basically, if you're triggered, it's no longer co-regulating. You're not being like a source of
No.
grounding for that person.
Totally.
You're now in a
No.
cycle.
Right. And then that person now feel they recognize your trigger, whether they do it consciously or not. And so now
Exactly.
they, instead of kind of getting support for their stuff, now they feel they have to jump in and help you with your feelings over what they brought to you. And a lot of times this happens
Such a
more with
mess.
parenting. This is a big parenting one.
Yep.
Because we have so much more is, the stakes are high. We want to protect our children. So when they bring hard situations to us, it is, so, as you know, I don't know if both of you are parents, but
Just me.
yeah, it is. It's, it's easy to get, I think it's much easier to get dysregulated when your kids bring you hard stuff than anybody else in the world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting, like I have a lot of mom clients, and something that does get brought up a lot is that they get really triggered, like the mom can get really triggered when their husband is activated around their kids, because
But
it
yeah,
triggers like the part of
mama
you that
bear.
when you were a kid. Yes,
Yes.
totally. You're like, you're just going to protection mode for your child, which then further creates more issues
Yes.
in the marriage dynamic. But I mean, I feel like that would be for like our part 2
That's a
conversation potentially.
big one for me.
Yeah.
That's like huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
It's
been
something
a
that
major
I talk to you about
challenge.
it all the
Yeah.
time. And because it just, there's so many entanglements, there's so many different
Yeah.
layers to it. But without kind of opening up that box, I'm curious to know, to talk a little bit on what a disorganized attachment style would look like in this type of dynamic. Is it just basically dependent on the situation and whatever's going on for them that day? Or like, is it that if their partner is presenting more avoidant, that they would naturally go into more of an anxious response? Yeah, what's
Well,
kind of more
okay.
typical?
So when I'm, in my experience with couples, those with disorganized attachment are more likely going to play the anxious role in the relationship. And they're usually going to be with an avoidant partner because there's so much energy with disorganized and there's so much energy with anxious. It almost just, it's too much energy for the system. So that's what I see more of, right? When I see a disorganized partner. And when you say which scenario do you mean?
I guess just in that kind of negative pattern cycle. Yeah, I'm curious to know kind of how, a disorganized person might show up.
Okay, they're going to be more dysregulated. They're going to be more easily dysregulated. They're going to have more extreme reactions to their dysregulation. A lot of times that's going to look like yelling, getting big, maybe storming out, big things. Or it could be big in the sense of just almost like dissociating, just completely numbing out. That doesn't look like a big reaction, but it is a big reaction thematically. It could be that one day there's no trigger at all. The partner says something offhandedly, they don't get triggered at all. But then the next day, their resources are low and they just go off. They just fly off the handle over the comment, that was fine the next day. Sometimes I describe disorganized attachment as one person's disorganized attachment can look very different from another person's disorganized attachment. And one person's disorganized attachment on Saturday can look very different from their own disorganized attachment on Tuesday, because there's this just so much just chaos. Usually people, it's kind of like they start off life with trauma, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens with trauma? Well, then you get health problems, then you get job problems, and you get trauma just sets this domino effect into place. And then all of a sudden you have all these like problems you're dealing with in life. So it just makes everything harder, and so it's like then your resilience is lower, your sources are lower, then you're going to be more likely to have relationship problems. You're more likely to get into a relationship with someone who isn't the greatest partner to begin with because your template growing up wasn't so healthy. So it's just, I would say that there's just a lot more chaos, unpredictability, escalation.
Yeah. I guess I wonder then, like, what is the hope for someone who struggles with this? And
Yeah. To me, maybe it's because I have some control over it because I can help people with it. But to me, all of this information is just positive. It's just so positive because it gives us a map for healing. I mean, it's like, okay, here's the map of the problem. This, I just personally, and obviously, because this is what I do, to me, attachment theory is the closest science has come to really explaining how relationships work, what makes them thrive, what makes them not work, and what to do to fix them. And so, I mean, the first step for someone with a disorganized attachment is truly self-regulation and learning to develop a healthy relationship with themselves, trust themselves. That is possible. Self-compassion, working through shame. Shame is such a huge piece of all of this, especially with disorganized attachment. I mean, I think anybody with an insecure attachment of any type is going to have a lot of shame to work through.
Yeah.
And then just kind of learning how to trust self, trust others, trust, it's so easy for someone with a disorganized attachment. One of the reasons they're so triggered is they say, one quote I really like from the original studies on attachment is, if those with anxious and avoidant attachment grow up in emotionally insensitive homes, those with disorganized attachment grow up in emotionally threatening homes. And so it's not just a sense of insensitivity, but it's actually danger. Like people with with disorganized attachment, they don't think my partner's dropping me when my partner doesn't respond. They think my partner hates me and wants to hurt me. They're not responding to me because they hate my guts and see this is just confirmation that all they want to do is hurt me. And so of course your response is going to be bigger. Your fear's bigger. The impact is bigger. And so, it's just whatever, it's just learning to, there's layers. There's so many layers to it, but it's just, you got to hop on that train and of self-healing and just go with it. Understand, like, look, this is a journey, but any healing is better than no healing. And if you just stay with it and you put one foot in front of the other, I mean, over time, you just start growing. And I think, that's true with any type of healing that you embark on. There's so many good ways to heal. But I just think with this attachment work, maybe it's just more efficient. It gets to the heart of the issue faster.
Yeah, I think it helps people find safety faster.
Yeah.
Starting with finding the secure base within themselves. And I think one of the things that attachment theory has offered me and Gina is a lot of compassion for ourselves. Yeah, I mean, because everything that I've consumed of your work and your projects is like, these are like maladaptations.
Absolutely.
Like sad ways we try to move through the world and find okayness, but like we're not trying to be like cruel, awful people.
No. And it's loving yourself. I just, I'm doing this podcast. I just recorded the commentary for my last episode before I hopped on with you guys. And that's what it was about. It was about loving and accepting yourself even when you mess up. If you're that's almost the definition of secure attachment, is being able to maintain love and self-acceptance and self-compassion even in your worst places, even when that anxiety gets the best of you and you send the 1,000 texts, or even when that avoidance gets the best of you and you just want to, make a snarky comment and then shut down, a hit and run or whatever. And that's why, honestly, what you just said, that's why I see this work as actually positive. It's a reframe. It's a goodness, there's something so wholesome and pure and truthful about it that there are other types of ways to kind of make sense of issues and explain them. It just doesn't bring that last bit of like humanity into it.
Yeah, because I think in those moments, that's when we need the secure attachment the most.
Absolutely.
And the reason why we feel so dysregulated is because we didn't get it. And so I think that was, like you said, the biggest, like, kind of last puzzle piece for me to really start finally having compassion for myself and my overreactions, because I think so much of my life and therapy journey for the past like 20 years was basically me trying to figure out like what's wrong with me,
what's
why am I like
wrong with
this,
you?
and I hate this part about me, I hate when I get like this, and basically trying to fight with yourself to never feel those big emotions, which of course doesn't feel safe at all. And of course then you become a parent and then you're like, I'm never going to traumatize my kid, and you never want to have those reactions in front of them. But I think learning about these attachment styles have made me so much more compassionate towards myself, to see beyond the pattern and see me underneath that. Again, giving myself so much love and space and compassion in those moments. It's like there's a part of me that's like, finally, like, thank you. Somebody met me here where I needed to be met, because, our parents, I mean, I can speak about mine. They really didn't know how to be with big emotions. And so when you grow up thinking that those are bad,
Yep.
it can be really scary to finally give space for them to be there. But then it feels like such a sweet relief once you actually experience what that loving response can be like.
Totally.
Yeah.
I just did last weekend, I did a 2-hour shame workshop. And I walk people through very strategically, step by step, the shame healing approach that I use with my clients. And, the end point is exactly what you've just described, which is, can I love myself in the darkest moments? Right. And that's where the healing is. Because when you take any problem, right, that you have in life or any situation, when you throw on shame and self-hate on top of that, it's over. You're done. You're
Totally.
dysregulated. You're not going to be able to get through it. Yeah. So why not take away that, like that fire? And it just makes everything so much more manageable.
Well, yeah, because then you can actually deal with the actual issue instead of the secondary emotions
shame.
on top of it.
Yes, exactly.
And I think also creating that secure, unconditional, self-loving relationship to ourselves has also created like a new template for what we're willing to accept in relationships, whether they be romantic, work-related, or just friends. Because, when we are not self-accepting, we tolerate really strange fear-based behaviors. And I think that's how we become very dysfunctional. But your work has given me so much of myself back.
Oh,
I have really, I thought like I was looking at all of your green posts on your Instagram to like, clear up the negative communication cycles, but it was ultimately helping me really become a secure base for myself. I realized I could swap out everything that I thought my partner was doing or my friend was doing and just put myself in there.
right.
And because I couldn't control what anyone else was going to do or how they were going to respond, I had to give them that free will. But for me, I could show up in this validating way. I could show up with curiosity. I could take a different approach with my own problems. And yeah, it's made all the difference.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. I love it. I
Yeah.
love how you're circling it back to you. I mean, it's true. Every single one of those posts that are about a partner is also about yourself as your own partner.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's like the crux
becoming
of both of our works.
Yes, becoming your best self partner.
Yeah. Just one last thing, I think, kind of going back to that parenting thing for anybody who is listening and is a parent, because I think one of the hardest parts is having your child see you when you might be in this dysregulated state.
Yeah.
And I used to really wish that she didn't have to see me like that. But I think what it offers her is this really beautiful opportunity to see that I can accept myself when I make a mistake, and that big emotions are okay, and that we all go through these harder days and days that feel a little bit more easeful. And I feel like that has actually equipped my daughter with so much more capacity to be with life and everything that she's going to deal with versus a lot of parents who hope that, they never trigger their kids or never do anything wrong or never yell at them. But I think the biggest gift is them seeing, oh, look, mom made a mistake and she's okay with it. She's, repaired it. She's owned up to it. She's taking responsibility and she's not doing the shame spiral thing that I know a lot of us have seen our parents do.
Do you, let me ask you about this one other piece of it. Like that part of you that gets dysregulated is the part, you get dysregulated because you're scared, right?
Yes.
And you get scared because something is important to you. Mm-hmm. And whatever it is that's important to you is probably, something good, right? It's probably something healthy. And so it's not just that dysregulated part needs to be tolerated. It gets celebrated. That part of you is worthy of celebration. That part of you is your emotional part, which it's what makes you a good mom. Sometimes it gets scared and it goes too far. But I try to do that with my kids too. It's like, this part of you, you got scared, that's what people get selfish when they're scared. They start focusing on kind of trying to get their own needs met. But that's also a healthy part of you that deserves to be celebrated because you'll advocate for your own needs.
I love that. And I think that's been one of the biggest things that you and I have both learned about really loving and appreciating our anger.
Yes,
absolutely. It really is a signal.
It is.
Of your boundary and what's not okay. And so I love that you added that in because absolutely it's one of the things that, when my daughter feels like there's been an injustice or something's
Yeah.
not fair. Like, I want her to lean into that, because
Totally.
give a voice to that
Yeah.
instead of what we've been taught, which is to
Yeah.
suppress that and basically tolerate
Yes.
and make it your own problem and kind of internalize. But yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that little bit in there. But
I love it.
we
Yeah.
definitely want to have you back for a part 2.
Yeah, I
There's
was
so
going
much
to
more.
say the anger posts are what brought me to Julie, and I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I sent them to you, where
You
it was
did.
all about actually seeing the value in anger.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
up until that point, I hadn't learned to listen to what
Yeah.
anger was trying to tell me. And, oh my God, yeah, we could do a whole part 2 on like attachment and parenting, anger as a
Yeah.
reaction. There's so many more
So
avenues we
much,
could go
so
down.
much. Yeah.
And you're just a well of knowledge, and I'm so
Well, thank
grateful to you and
I
the things that you've created. But here on the Spiraling Higher podcast, we always end with asking our guests a final question, which
Sure.
obviously has to do with the theme and the name of our podcast. But we always ask what sort of theme or themes that you have had to consistently spiral through. And these are the things that you have to come back to again and again, that you have to apply the balm of self-compassion and love,
Okay.
but helps humanize our guests, because I mean, we're not perfect.
Gosh. All right, give me just a second. There's so
Mhm.
many. I guess it would probably be, I'm a kind of a workaholic, but it doesn't matter if it's like work or any kind of work. Like, it's very difficult for me to just relax into anything. And so I have a tendency to always. Do you guys remember Winnie the Pooh? Did you ever, are you guys remember
Yes, yes.
Rabbit? Remember Rabbit? How Rabbit
yeah.
was just like always like, I kind of
Yes.
have a tendency to be a rabbit. So it's like if I'm sitting there doing nothing, I might start like brushing dust off I'm just coming up with some random thing off the armrest of the couch, right? And that becomes an
Right.
actual job for me, right?
You
And so
create jobs.
yes, I'm just like, and so if anybody comes along and if I'm in this zone and they're trying to talk to me, I'm like, I feel like I'm being interrupted, right? From my just here I was 10 seconds ago trying to sit and relax. So what I've had to do is recognize like I lose connection points when I'm constantly in this headspace of productivity, and I've gotten so much better in life at this, but so I've had to, I do have to constantly though, like check that. And I have to learn to like turn myself off and get into zones where it's like, all I am right now is available. That's it. I'm just available. I'm available to whatever happens. I'm available to experiences of life. I'm available to the next person who comes in and tries to talk to me. I'm available to a person who comes to the door, instead of like my agenda is so rigid and I can't be interrupted. So I guess it would say building in space in life to be open to whatever experience comes my way, instead of just kind of trying to take control of every moment.
That is
And then I
huge.
have to, then the other piece of that is when I slip up, which happens, then I have to be able to step back and go, oh my gosh, what is so bad about that part that wants to take care of my family and do a good job and keep order? No, it's not a bad part. It's a beautiful part. Sometimes it gets scared, and I get scared of like the whole world collapsing if I don't keep working. And that's okay. I got scared. No big deal. I can go right back into, who I really want to be in the world.
That's so
that.
beautiful. I love that so much. Yeah. And I think it's so good for people to hear that the experts, right? That, oh yeah, I'm still working on these fearful parts.
I don't think we ever complete. There's a Alanis Morissette song called Incomplete. I agree with that song. I think we're just,
me too.
But what else is life if you're not growing?
Totally.
Yeah.
It gets to be this ever growing journey of learning to love ourselves at every turn.
Journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank you,
Julie.
Oh, you're
for
so
joining
welcome.
us, and we'll have to have you back in 2025.
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. Bye.